Hey everybody, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor from Water and Waste Digest. Today I have with me Clarence Wittwer. He is the City of Pearland Director of Public Works. We're going to talk about the winter storm in Texas around Valentine's Day, some of the resiliency efforts that Clarence and his team put into place, and also some of the creative thinking that was necessary to adjust on the fly as the gravity of the storm's impact changed over the course of that period. So Clarence, thanks so much for being on the call. We appreciate you taking the time.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so why don't we start kind of with that resiliency plan? Can you talk a little bit about what you guys were looking at leading up to the storm? What did you prepare around? What boxes were you trying to tick to make sure that you guys were as prepared as you could be, knowing this storm was coming?
Yeah, so we've got a pretty good resiliency plan here. I mean, being that we live in Hurricane Alley and we just get hit, year after year with either hurricanes or tropical storms. So we've got a great plan. I mean, we spent actually a week. So most people, 5 days into it, when we started to get water back and started to thaw out a little bit, were say, "Oh my gosh, it's been a horrible 5 days." I said, "Well, our people have been actually going for about 11 days because the 4 or 5 days headed up to it, we were preparing."
Mhm.
So, it's the standard that you would think, making sure all the generators have actually been run and tested, that they're topped off, that all your chemicals are topped off. That was a big one for us because we figured that once an actual ice storm came in, our deliveries would be impacted with ability to get out on the streets and the highways. So again, testing everything, making sure our staffing was up to date. So we use that typical tier system that cities use in this geographical region, and where not everybody is working, especially in an ice
Mhm.
storm. You're going to send home your not what everybody's essential in our business, but the people that don't need to be on the roads, we send them home. And sometimes we'll get flack for that. Like, how come everybody should be called in? And well, no, that maybe for a hurricane, but you
Mhm.
have to think about the situation. There's ice on the roads, so these people go home. So we did all the usual. We checked the boxes. We made sure batteries were charged on the generators. We had ran them for some time. We actually have maintenance contract with our generators, things like that. We have on-call electrical contract with some very good consultants down here that came and just went through everything. So we spent days, like I said, about 4 or 5 days ahead of the event, actually making sure that we were good to go.
Mhm. Yeah, what just out of curiosity, what about like weatherproofing is not something I imagine you guys have to deal with much. But when
Yeah.
you were looking at like making sure that your filters would still run, I know that in Deer Park, Texas, I spoke with their supervisor of their plant there, and they were talking about that was a challenge for them is that their filters were frozen, so they had to find a way to heat them up. Were there things that you were trying to do to weatherize some of the elements of the plant, like sensors and filters and stuff like that, and if they were open air?
Yeah, absolutely. So our system is a little bit different. So Deer Park, that was probably Mr. Cook. He's a great
Yep.
guy, but
Awesome.
they actually have the surface water plant. So ours is in construction. So
Okay.
until right at this moment, we get about 50% of it's about 46% of our water from 10 water wells, groundwater treatment around town. The rest we
Okay.
get from the city of Houston through two large interconnects. So we didn't have so much as that same issue you would have as this big surface water plant sitting out there in the atmosphere. But
Mhm.
we did. We actually that was we've had a couple of good freezes about 3 years ago. It was before I had taken over the role here. They had a good freeze in about the same month in February. I believe it was 2017 and 2018. And so they had some lessons learned there. So this time they were prepared. We had everything, all the important valves, critical, the ones you can get a few years ago during that was the actuators had frozen. So
Mhm.
of course we use a combination here of air, of pneumatic, electric, things like that. But they'll all freeze. It doesn't matter how they're getting their energy. But we went out. Backflow preventers was a big one.
Okay.
Got those insulated, not just um, isolated, but then the day of the storm when it actually rolled in, we've actually made sure that we went out again and drain those open bypasses and then insulated those. Like made sure they were insulated well. So
Mhm.
because everybody's design is a little bit different, but our backflow preventers here, our system semi-standard, but it comes up out of the ground and goes back down. So you have it's just open to the atmosphere. So
Yeah.
open to the weather. So we really had a lot. And when we did have breaks later, that I'm sure you'll talk about, but that was one of the places where we had our breaks. Backflow preventers. We did a lot of insulating. putting, the heaters where we could. Our generators were already set up with block heaters, so that we were good on that. But that is not, you're right, that's not a usual thing here, but I think because the city had been affected by that over the last few years, they were prepared for it. And it was like actually one of the first things on the list because of, it's the fool me once the
Yeah.
syndrome there. So it was one of the first things on their list. That's the first thing they actually did, I think, before they topped off generators and chemicals and checked everything else, was they went and started wrapping and putting heaters on things that they knew were vulnerable.
Mhm. Yeah, so to kind of going more into how things progressed over time, what were some of the initial challenges that the storm presented to you and your team? Where like you had this resiliency plan that you planned out ahead of time, and then the storm hits. What were those initial concerns that you had to deal with, and how did that evolve over time and become more complicated?
I think some of the initial concerns was really just the safety of the team. During the first 24, almost 48 hours of it, the generators did actually perform well for a while.
Hmm.
But is that team keeping them off the road? And then we started getting those calls after, almost 48 hours when we did start having breaks out in the system, and then being able to get them out there. And it was much more than just utilities, because in this situation, everybody, it's just one. There's no like the
Hmm.
water department, wastewater department, and they just become one operating unit. So the biggest one was the power outages. What started here, it was supposed to be a rolling blackouts in order to ease the grid, and then after our area ended up being one of the first ones shut down. And that was
Hmm.
the thing I like to make sure most people understand, is that it was shut down on purpose to preserve the grid, we're told. And and then they decided at that point, shortly thereafter, that they were just going to leave it off for a while because the grid was in such bad shape. Yeah, so that was our biggest one, was that we went into it ahead of time. Generators were ready, and we were warned. That was one thing I want to make sure everybody out there understands, is that the local
Hmm.
provider for our area, most of Houston, Pearland. For those that don't know, Pearland is a southern suburb of Houston. Literally, our northern border is Houston's southern border near Hobby Airport. So we pretty much share the same power grid. As I mentioned earlier, we share water. So we went, our generators were good. They ran. We were told ahead of time by CenterPoint, say, hey, there are going to be these rolling blackouts. And then they rolled and they didn't unroll. So something happened and they decided, oh, we're just going to stay off. And they kept telling us it doesn't matter how much we talked to them, how many times we had state officials on the phone with our mayor. They're like, no, we're not going to turn this back on. We cannot turn this back on. The grid will completely fail. And that's where the issues we ran into in our weather in Texas. So we had our generators, they ran, they were prepared, and they weren't prepared for that kind of cold, that kind of flash cold. There's things we don't do in Texas that I assure you that we are going to be doing from here on out that other parts of the country do. Like there's an additive that you put in diesel fuel where the diesel starts to gel under a certain temperature after so many hours of running. Well,
Hmm.
we didn't know that here. Our fuel supplier did not use the additive because it's Texas. I mean, we're 30 miles from
Yeah.
the beach.
Why would you?
We didn't use them. Yeah, why would you? We didn't use it. I mean, we had the block heaters. One of the big things that really killed us with that extended power outage was it absolutely just almost instantly drains the batteries that's needed to run both start the generator, to run the block heaters, to run things like that. Some of those things are run off the batteries, and that was a big challenge for us, was batteries.
Hmm.
I don't go too much more of that. I don't want to get off of this question until if you've got
Yeah.
everything you need on that, we can move to the next.
Yeah, I was gonna note too that you had mentioned that even just trying to get refueling from your fuel supplier could be a challenge because they also didn't have power. So how are they gonna pump their fuel? So
Yeah,
it was this
that was a
this
huge one.
yeah, yeah. So there's
Yeah.
this whole domino effect that because this
Yep.
power doesn't exist, everyone is affected by it. And so it results in this domino effect of, all right, well, it presents a challenge here, and then it's a challenge to solve that challenge because there's no power, and it's a challenge to solve that challenge because there's no power, so on and so forth.
And we ran into the same problem with chemical suppliers. We were actually good for days as we're set up under, the design criteria by the state and the EPA. We can go for days on our chemicals. But
Mhm.
when things did get to where we were kind of like, well, I would really like to top that tank off, then the suppliers couldn't get on the road because of the sheets of ice.
Yeah.
So, but as
Yeah.
you mentioned, it was just huge domino everywhere. We have a great fuel contract, a fuel supplier. I've dealt with in numerous entities that I've worked for in this area for more than 2 decades. But they are on the exact same grid. They're only a few miles from us. They're on the exact same part of the grid by the same supplier. And you're absolutely right. They did not have, their generators failed. They did not have power to run the pumps to fill their fuel tankers to get to us. So
Mhm.
as you mentioned, yeah, a huge domino effect.
Yeah, yeah. So, curious too about kind of how you were communicating with the public during all of this. Obviously, without power, it presents some whole new challenges. What avenues were you guys using? I know that social media was a big one for a lot of people, but what were some ways that you were trying to communicate to the public? Here's the status of things at our facilities. Here's what you can expect from us over the next couple of hours, days, and weeks. Yada yada. Explain to me how you guys were communicating with the public a little bit.
I think social media was a big one. For whatever reason, although there were some issues with the carriers off and on in the area, in general, there was cellular data.
Hmm.
So there were some issues with some Wi-Fi, with some internet providers in the area, but it didn't last long. It was intermittent. It was enough for people to stay connected, I think, for the most part. Even though I lost internet at home for a while, it did come back on, off and on, off and on. And I think most people, but it was enough to stay connected. So we did. Social media was about all we can do in this day and age, other than phones. We use the system here, and it's not an endorsement by me. It's just the name of it because I don't know anything else about it. But it's called Everbridge, and we can send out mass. You can think of it as an evil robodialer that everybody hates those robocallers, but because it's the government, it's okay. Because so we send
Hmm.
that out and targeted messages that's recorded by either the mayor, our communications director, just like, hey, this is the status with what's going on with the water. This is the status with the roads,
Hmm.
and that system is pretty neat because you can target a particular subdivision in the city. You can target a particular zone in the city. You can target the whole city. You set it how you want.
Hmm.
The downfall of that, and it's just a weakness of it that I don't think you can really fix, is that the residents have to sign up for that. So
Hmm.
your target audience has to already have signed up to say, hey, I want these. So
Yeah.
social media became a big one. Twitter, I think, became a big one for us. Twitter and Facebook. I know our mayor was with us almost every step of the way between the emergency operations center, city hall, wherever he was. He was out a lot. We filmed a lot of PSAs, a lot of, hey, little videos. This is how you close your valve off. This is how you do that, because we got
Hmm.
hammered with that. Everybody wanting us to come out and close their valve off. I mean, we probably had a couple thousand calls for that.
Yeah. And how are you
And
gonna get
yeah,
there?
yeah, exactly. And that was a big one for us. So just
Hmm.
the during the first 3 days, I'd say, was just the accessibility. But
Hmm.
we did what we could between targeted phone calls, social media, and based on the typical responses that you see on social media, it was obvious that people were using it
Hmm.
because they have to comment. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things, again, bringing up my conversation that I had with Nick at the Deer Park facility, he talked about they started by dripping their faucets and realizing that, oh, wait, this is creating a different set of problems where there's a water loss issue here. How did you guys address education in terms of like dripping faucets and that kind of a thing? Was that part of your messaging structure as well?
it was a part of our original messaging structure, but luckily we kind of caught that before it went out. So that's a good thing. Is everybody in the city of Pearland, we call high performance sprinters. We have actual training for that. There's minimal hierarchy unless it's an emergency situation, and then of course that's your emergency manager and your police chief, fire chief, public works director.
Yeah.
So we all collaborate on everything. So every
Hmm.
time a messaging went out, there was 100 eyes looking at that messaging and
Yeah.
offering, hey, don't maybe we shouldn't say that. So that one came across, and it was from an old message from the last time they had the freeze, and it was you need to drip your faucet. And then myself and my assistant directors, that's the first thing we were like, no, no, we
Hmm.
don't want to do that, because that actually created a problem the time before. And there was some concern on that, whether that was the right messaging or not. And then before we even got ours posted, the city of Houston actually posted the same thing, a video and some social media saying, hey, don't do that. That's going to hurt us.
Mhm.
But it is still a challenge, because I have to say, I live in a little city just south of Pearland, a suburb of a suburb. But we had to drip our faucets, and again, each system's a little bit different. But that system was a little just more resilient because they were 100% wells. They weren't relying on any other entity around them to get water. They still had issues, but I will tell you that in that city where I live, Alvin, if we hadn't dripped our faucets, I probably would have had we would have had a lot more broken pipes. So each system is so different. That's the thing. And I feel for my neighbors like Houston, who have all of that in one massive city limits. They have that rural here, and then they have the downtown, and they have all that they have to deal with, because that one message is not necessarily appropriate for the 2.5 million people that they were serving. So I honestly, hats off to them on how they handled that. But for us, the dripping, we just didn't push it. We didn't address it as much. It kind of was, we were of the opinion that people are going to do what they're going to do. So if they're going to, what they decide they want to drip their faucets, they're going to drip their faucets. And I'm not exactly have a dripping faucet police force to go door to door and say, hey, stop dripping your faucets. So we basically just took the messaging out, that verbiage out, and we didn't deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So where are you guys now in terms of your recovery? It sounded like you did lose you did lose water for part of the community for a little bit there, but could you talk about that experience for losing the water, and kind of how quickly you were able to recover from that, and where you guys are right now in terms of recovering from this storm?
Sure. So actually, right now we're pretty much back to normal. Other than now, we are addressing having after action reports and we're really honing in on the generators. Like, hey, we need to immediately stop several of our designs because we've got two of our 5 wastewater plants under expansion and a surface water plant halfway through construction. So we need to put a pin immediately now. Stop. Don't install any of the generator stuff that we design, and we need to readdress those designs to deal with this in the future. And our current system, that like we need to go back and look. It's like, do we need to? Because it's Texas, so all of our generators, they're not in any kind of enclosures. They're just out in the open on pedestals of diesel fuel, and that's how they are. So we need to immediately, look at some kind of enclosures. Say, hey, can we get grant money for this because of the event? What do we need to do to make this better the next time? But we were back to normal. I would say we weren't out of the boil water notice yet, but by Thursday afternoon, we were back full pressure again. I think this is one of those catch-22 situations where when you talk about resiliency, one of the things everybody always brings up is, hey, you got to have an interconnect with your neighbors. Like, okay, so we've 2 massive interconnects. I mean, I think the one coming from the one side of Houston is 48 inches where we buy raw water. And then the other side is a 96-inch line from one of the water treatment plants where we actually buy water. And so, a little over 50% of our water comes from those sources. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you think like that's like the ultimate big box on resiliency. I got 2 massive interconnects. Well, what happens if your neighbor that you're getting all that water from, that you're getting the majority of your water from, goes down? And that's what happened here. Was they were massively affected by it. So they would basically lost water at both of those points because they were having massive breaks in their system and low pressure drops. And it's just one of those deals. Like, do you get angry at them? Because like, hey, I have a contract for 10 million gallons a day and I lost water. And I don't care I don't care what your situation was. By contract, you got to give me the 10 million gallons a day. You can't do that. I mean, we're all in the same boat. I mean, we were trying to help each other. And it kind of one of those, I hate saying this, but it was what it was. The generator, I think if our generators were better designed for that kind of event, we would have been all right, because we would have been able to just ramp up production. And that is how we staved it off for so long. We were able to keep, as we noticed ahead of time that the water was decreasing from the city of Houston. Because of their own situation, the communication wasn't the best in the world, but that was for all of us. Like I mentioned, internet was going out, and so many people in our business have gotten in the habit of sending an email instead of picking up a phone. And like, well, I hadn't heard from the plant manager at Southeast. So like, well, did you call him? Well, no. So, but we noticed our flows were coming down from those sources. So we could have normally, and we run this test over and over, where we can run our entire city, and that's how we used to run off of those 10 water wells for days. But the generator, that was the situation, was those generators. They did great for the first couple of days, and then they started, literally started, a couple of them started falling apart, like throwing shafts, and they just weren't designed for it. The
Yeah.
batteries started dying. That was a big one. We did learn some creativity in that. People can judge me for this all we want, but I think most cities now in this system have we call it the lock box. All entities in the city, they have this little box with an emergency key that only fire and police could access. And our batteries were just hard hit at every one of our generators. So, and that's what we ended up having to do, was we had our police had to go to the different auto parts stores after hours, let themselves in, leave IOUs on the counter with a city business card, say, hey, I got this, this, and this. And we would tell them, hey, I need this model number battery for this and this and this, and they would go get it for us. And the next day, the managers would come in if they were able to get there, and they call us, hey, no problem. And we just, again, if you need something else tonight and we're not here, come get it. They were very gracious, the entire city. I was so surprised at the business owners in the city, how they really pitched in. We had several that maybe in the past we might even had a contentious relationship with, but had said, hey, I have this massive generator over here sitting on my yard. Come get it. Like, this is cool. Like, this was a really cool event to see. So that, to me, that was a big silver lining, was to see how the people could work together when they wanted to, and put business, political relationships aside, and just help each other.
Yeah, that's something that I think you find a lot in moments of crises like this, where people just recognize, like, it's not about me right now, and that they put that aside and they say, this is about everyone, and raising the floor rather than me trying to reach a new ceiling, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you did mention earlier like looking at generator stuff, changing some plans for current designs that you're working on for expansions and whatnot. How else do you expect that this event will impact future resiliency for the facilities in Pearland, but also just for Texas facilities in general? Do you suspect there will be some pretty wide changes for how water and wastewater utilities are looking at the resiliency plans?
I honestly don't have a good answer for that. I think most of the resiliency, and there's all kinds of webinars going on already about it. And like, I always like joke about it. Every time we get a big event, it's like, well, this is going to be the next year's worth of presentations at AWWA or APWA, but at least in Texas. But I think it's going to hone in on the backup power system. We are limited, and this is something you've seen them, just the nasty comments that you see on social media. I had so many people on there that the system failed because the guy running the system was an idiot. Pretty sure that was me. So of course it's hard not to take that personal.
Yeah.
But they don't realize the bigger picture, like how the whole power outage thing happened. So we can beef up our redundant power system as much as we'd like. But at the end of the day, that's only going to get you for so long. Like, how you can't indefinitely just sit there and run off of generators. So that I'd say at the state level, I would expect to see and hope to see just a massive reform of our power system here. It failed. I can't help but notice some of my neighbors to the far west in Texas, like El Paso, never lost power because they were on New Mexico's grid. And that was, to me, it just shouts maybe why we would be interconnected with some of our neighbors, not just be relying on ourselves only. I love the state. It's been great. I've been here my whole life, but Texans love, it's all about me, and we can do anything by ourselves. And clearly that's not true. So that I would expect at my level, the generator is going to be the big thing. Looking at the generators, the backup power. But from the state, I expect to see that reform, and I've already seen hints of it. I've seen what's going on with our reliability council here with ERCOT,
Mhm,
politically, people that have left and investigations that are going on. So I would expect that reform to be the very next thing that we see on the news coming out.
mhm. Yeah. Well, I think you made a good point there that you guys can only control what you can control. At some point, a system has to rely on an outside force, and if that outside force fails, it creates problems. And you you can plan as much as you want around that, but it still comes down to the fact that if that outside force doesn't work the way you anticipate it to work, it challenges the entire plan.
Yeah, it really does. But
So,
again, every time touched on a little bit earlier, but every time one of these happens, we see just everybody reaching out, helping each other.
mhm,
Not too long ago, when the city of Lake Jackson had their issue with amoeba, our city and so many around were down there with tankers of water. We had our entire crews there. The APWA has an emergency council, and we work with Texas Department of Emergency Management, and they just sent out another email the other day where if you've gotten to where you can take a break in your system and send crews and trucks to this little city and help them work on breaks, things like that. So that's an active thing here. Very, very helpful. Even when we couldn't, in many instances here, we had water, we didn't have enough pressure to get it from the tanks into the system just because of the generators running. So we were still able to fill tankers of water for the hospitals, and many hospitals were around us in Pearland and the medical center in Houston were affected. So they were in a bad way because Houston didn't have water. So we were
mhm,
able to send tankers of water. You see little cities around us were sending tankers of water, even to us and to the hospitals. Um, uh,
mhm,
Nick Cook earlier, mentioned him from Deer Park. Even though they had issues with their plant, they are a state of Texas a certified laboratory for
mhm,
reporting, and so he opened his lab up. And he was like, so he sent out things to all the cities around here. He's like, hey, if you need, we don't normally do this, but
mhm,
if you need to you're on a boil water notice and you need to get that BACT testing done, that bacteriological testing results sooner, go ahead and bring them.
mhm.
We can't collect them for you, but bring them to the lab. I'll get them out as soon as I can. And that's just a great example of how the cities around here all kind of team up. And I've seen that over and over. I saw it when Hurricane Harvey hit the area, rolled in across Corpus and Rockport. And the same thing there. So many of the little cities were reaching out, were helping each other with lab testing, sending water. And that's just, uh, it's a good environment to work in. It's good to see that. And the one good thing, we are so tight in that regards that we will all have many of the same exact comments when it comes time for comments from us to the different advisory councils on some of these reforms.
Mhm. Yeah. I like that you mentioned that that these cities are kind of working together. It just stresses how important that networking can be for some of those local chapters of AWWA or WEF or other associations like that, how those connections help you out here too. So it's not just about being able to
Yeah.
talk shop, it's also about being able to help each other in a moment of crisis. So,
It's a
yeah.
really good point, actually, because a lot of what I had mentioned, that networking, helping each other out, only a very small part of that was done like by our APWA system, what we call the emergency council. A lot
Mhm.
of the area when I mentioned sending the tankers of water, even the stuff that was going on in Lake Jackson several months ago during Harvey, that's done by text, director
Mhm.
to director. I mean, so many of the directors in our area, we actually came up together. So neighboring cities like League City, Seabrook, we all started in the hole together, either putting clamps on or filling potholes. And almost all of that literally was done by text. It's like, hey, this is Clarence, I need this, or hey, this is Kevin in Seabrook, I need this, and this is,
Mhm.
and it was just, I don't know if there was ever even email sent in many of those cases. It was just, hey, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need?
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, I thank you so much for your time today and talking and getting to learn a little bit more about this. Water and Waste Digest does have a news article about some of the events that were going on that includes some comments from what were as it was happening. So check that out at the link below. We will also have a special report in our April WWD issue, so stay tuned for that as well. And thanks again, Clarence, for being on the call. I appreciate you sharing your experience and sharing some advice for people to consider when they're looking at crisis matters in the future for their facilities.
It was a pleasure.